Bill Self was looking ahead to this season before last year was even over, and for good reason. But does he have the best transfer portal class in the Big 12?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your co-hosts. I'm Andy Patton. He is Isaac Shade. You are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. It's the dog days of summer, and the sports are not sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, Isaac, it's day 2 of 6 in our transfer portal week. We're talking all 5 power conferences this week. We're going to close out our transfer portal conversations next Monday, talking about the rest of college basketball. For those of you who missed our Monday episode, we talked about the ACC, and how we laid out that show is pretty much how we're laying out this show here as well, talking about the Big 12 Conference. We'll talk about our all transfer first team preseason, projecting who we think could be in the all Big 12 team conversation as transfers into this conference. We're then going to talk about our favorite transfer portal classes, ranking the top 5 portal classes in this conference. And then we'll close out the show with some superlatives. We'll talk about best draft prospects, sophomore breakouts, some maybe unheralded, under the radar type transfers coming into this conference. All things Big 12, all things transfer portal today. Isaac, why don't you kick us off talking about the 5 players we projected as a all transfer first team for the Big 12 conference in the 24-25 season?
Yeah, here we go, Andy. And not spoiler alert, but just as a matter of structure, we are not picking more than 1 player per school. Yeah. So if you hear us pick Norchad Omier, who we have picked to be on our list, that means you won't hear Jeremy Roach's name. So don't get all up in arms. It's just a matter of function so that we're spreading the love around the Big 12. So yes, Norchad Omier coming over from Miami to Baylor.
That was your spoiler alert right there.
What? Yeah, exactly.
That was your spoiler.
Yes. Norchad Omier coming from Miami to Baylor. I loved him at Miami. I think he'll continue to be awesome at Baylor for Scott Drew's team. Should be a lot of fun. Next, perhaps the guy that's going to be the single best scorer in this conference is Tucker DeVries, who transfers with his dad basically from Drake to West Virginia. He was, top 10 scoring nationally last year at Drake. Should be great at the Big 12. We have no concern about the up transfer of DeVries. Next, Kansas. Here's your 1 Kansas player on this list. We could have picked a whole bunch of them, but the guy we think will be at the top of this Kansas transfer portal class is AJ Storr, who comes in from Wisconsin. Should be great for Bill Self. Just another one of these like consummate professional guys that will do great. Same thing, Kansas State. Hard to pick just one, but the guy we're going with is the most, the transfer that was the most talked about, the highest kind of profile, and that's Coleman Hawkins. Joins this front court in Manhattan, Kansas, for the Go Wildcats. And so you go there. And then Andy, 5th on our list of our all Big 12 transfer team is Mr. JT Toppin, coming over from New Mexico to Texas Tech. Boy, Grant McCaslin did a good job in this transfer portal. Oh, by the way, JT Toppin has a lot to bring to the table. If you never saw New Mexico play last year, man, make sure you go watch some JT Toppin highlights. He is an absolute dude. So, Andy, we've got some honorable mentions like we did in our ACC show, but same question I asked you on the ACC show. Who do you feel most confident about on this list, and who do you feel least confident about on this list? And let me say before you answer, this felt like an easier task to me than the ACC list.
I think so too. Yeah. And I think part of it was because we chose to not do multiple from the same teams. Otherwise we would have to have, figured out what we wanted to do with like Zeke Mayo or Rylan Griffin, both from Kansas, or of course Jeremy Roach from Baylor, and even some other some of Kevin Overton from Texas Tech, for example, or some of the other transfers joining Jerome Tang and the Wildcats. Like doing one per team definitely helped. In terms of who I am most confident about, it's Tucker DeVries. And there's a couple reasons for that. Obviously, his scoring prowess, his veteran experience, continuing to play for the same coach in a new program. And I like some of the other things West Virginia did in the transfer portal, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But DeVries has got the keys to the kingdom. Like, this is his team. He is going to be the person who has the ball in his hands. He's going to do a ton of scoring. I don't particularly think this West Virginia team is going to be all that good. I think they'll be improved from where they were last year. And I think Darian DeVries is a good coach. So I think that the long-term potential for West Virginia is in a pretty good spot. But I think that this team is going to be okay. And a lot of it is going to be done by Tucker DeVries. And so I think he kind of feels like he's in the most likely spot to land as an all Big 12 player next year, or certainly be among the 5 most productive transfers in the Big 12. And in terms of least confident, I think I have to go with Coleman Hawkins. And it's not even really about Coleman Hawkins as much as it's about Kansas State having acquired a large number of front court players and not exactly knowing whether is Hawkins going to play the 4? Is he going to play the 3? What's going to happen with, Achor or Aganan Yenso or Bay Fall? Obviously, Hawkins is going to have a huge role for Kansas State, and I think I feel fairly confident that he still will be in this conversation, but there's just enough uncertainty with what his role is going to look like to have me not quite as confident about his ability to be like a surefire guaranteed. He's one of the best transfers in the conference next year.
Yeah, I think that's the way to put it, especially as opposed to the other 4 guys on this list, whose roles I feel almost very confident about. And so just kind of by default, I would agree with you on both of those, both DeVries and Coleman Hawkins. Andy, our honorable mentions on this all Big 12 first team transfer team. Trey Townsend coming over from Oakland to Arizona, the reigning Horizon Player of the Year. Jeremy Roach from Duke to Baylor. If we hadn't instituted our one guy per team rule, he probably would have made this list. Dylan Mitchell from Texas to Cincinnati. Love to see him hit it 1-3. Milo Zuzan, who goes from Oklahoma to Houston. Josh Jefferson from St. Mary's to Iowa State. We'll talk more about him later. Rylan Griffin bringing his 3-point shooting from Tuscaloosa over to Kansas. And then Zeke Mayo from South Dakota State to Kansas. That dude's going to score a lot of points for Bill Self this year.
I'd like to just mention briefly that 2 years ago, both Dylan Mitchell and Milos Uzan would look like Big 12 to AAC transfers, going from Texas to Cincinnati and Oklahoma to Houston, but rather they are now SEC to Big 12 transfers. Just another one of those weird things we sometimes see when looking at the transfer portal and conference realignment kind of combined. But I love this list. There's plenty of other talented players who have transferred into the conference. We'll talk about many more of them here coming up, but this is the best college basketball conference, right up there, at least with the SEC and the Big East. And certainly you can see by how much talent has joined this conference, why it continues to be near the top of that list.
That's absolutely correct, Andy. And to that point, we want to go from talking about individuals now to talking about these classes as a whole, the teams that brought them together. So we're going to move from like, who's the best dude or group of 5 dudes to talking about which teams brought in the best transfer classes in the Big 12 for 2024-25. We'll get to that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel, we love sports so much and we never want them to stop. But in these dog days of summer, we just get fewer games. It's just the reality. The sports aren't sportsing like we still want them to. But the good news is that FanDuel lets you keep the dream alive and keep sports going whenever you want. All you got to do, open up the app, dream up bets anytime you're in the mood. And the best news is that this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So right now, when we usually only have Major League Baseball, good news, the Olympics are happening over in Paris, France, and you better believe that FanDuel's got some numbers for you. How about this? Over under on USA's gold medal count for the entirety of the games, sitting at 40.5. Andy, what do you think you'd do on that, over or under?
I'd probably lean over, but I think that's a really good line. It feels like they're going to be right in that 38 to 45 type range, just from what I've been reading and getting ready for.
Woo, baby, it's going to be great. So if you want to dive in, see if you can beat Andy in choosing that right or wrong, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, or here at College Basketball, your teams every day. We're talking Big 12. We'd like to encourage you to go check out the Locked On Big 12 podcast. Drake Tolles, the host of that, does a fantastic job. You can also catch him hanging out with the Savannah Bananas. Andy, we're moving now, as we said, from the individuals that make up these transfer teams to the ranking the classes. So what we're going to do is give a top 5 of these transfer classes. And because it's the Big 12, because it's the best conference in basketball, I know that we're not talking the money that the SEC or the Big 10 has, but because of the prestige of this conference, dudes are wanting to get here to show how good they are. And so, Andy, while we, with the ACC yesterday, we had that clear-cut top 3, and then we had this like basket, as you said, of like 7 other teams.
Yeah.
With this one, we had a pretty easy time getting to about 6, maybe 7 total teams. And then we felt like we had what we felt pretty good about with the top 5. There's a little discrepancy between where we went and where some other places have picked another team in their top 5. But let's get right into it. Andy, take us through this thing.
Yeah, it's a little similar to the ACC in the sense that, at least for me, I felt very confident about the first 3 teams we put down. And then the final 2 spots could have gone 4 or 5 different ways pretty comfortably. But start with Kansas. I think it's impossible to not start with Kansas, even if they didn't bring in Riley Kugel, who was one of the first big-time transfers they added in the portal. He ultimately decided not to come to Kansas, is going to Mississippi State. Talk about him on Friday when we get to the SEC. But for the Jayhawks, it was not only a multiple players coming in, multiple high level players coming in, but guys who fit roles really adequately. And I think if you can hit that trifecta, it's a quality over quantity, but also a decent number of players coming in. And again, just fitting the roles that Bill Self needed to fill on this roster. You get AJ Storr coming in, who's going to be just tremendous in that kind of Kevin McCullough, Jalen Wilson type role. For the Jayhawks, you get some other really talented. You get Rylan Griffin, like we talked about, him coming over from Alabama. Zeke Mayo, I think, is a tremendously maybe underrated or underappreciated mid-major star from South Dakota State, same place that Baylor Shireman made a name for himself before he transferred to Creighton. Shaquille Moore, I think, is a good player for them to bring in, especially after the injury to El Marco Jackson. I think that helps them out. So I love this Kansas class. And then you got to stay in the same state. You got to go Kansas State at number 2. This is a much more of a quantity than anything else, but it's also a really quality class as well. We talked about Coleman Hawkins a little bit already, but they also get Chor from Samford. They also get Doug McDaniel from Michigan, who averaged 16 points a game last year in the Big 10. We've seen Jerome Tang do some tremendous stuff with transfer portal guards in the last couple of years. Now he gets one who's already had a ton of success in a high major in McDaniel. They get some mid-major guys coming in. Max Jones, I think, is going to be good. You get Bay Fall from Arkansas in the front court. Oganan Yenso, didn't even mention him yet. Potential guy who's going to lead the country in blocks if he plays a big enough role. Like, I'm not sure how the pieces fit for Kansas State, but to me, them and Kansas are very clearly the top 2, at least out of this Big 12 conference.
Yep. Andy, we go third to Baylor, and this one definitely is a quality over quantity. It's a 3-person class. And with all due respect to Jalen Celestine coming over from Cal, this is about Norchad Omier and Jeremy Roach. And all the more so because, as you said, as we talk about this and as we're processing these classes, not just about how many or how good, but also fit. And I love that Omier and Roach can just be this dynamic duo. Like, I cannot wait to see them in like pick and roll action. I cannot wait to see other bigs in the Big 12 underestimate Norchad Omier, even though he's a little bit undersized, because we've seen it in the ACC for multiple years now. And that's going to be the same case in the Big 12. You know, like, I feel like Kansas fans are going to be like, well, he's got nothing for Hunter because Hunter's like 18 feet tall.
Right.
You just watch how Norchad Omier is going to handle Hunter Dickinson, and it will be a lot of fun. I'm super excited about that, Andy, with Baylor and what Coach Drew, who is staying in Waco, is bringing to this squad. Next, number 4 on our list, we go to Lubbock, Texas, and Texas Tech, where Grant McCaslin is in year 2. This is another class that's not as big, which is funny. Man, what a weird time we live in, Andy. I'm talking about a class that has 4 transfers in it and calling it not as big. That's
Right.
a sign of the times, if ever I've heard of one. But this class brings in JT Toppin, who we had on our first team all transfer. Again, he's very good at basketball, folks. Kevin Overton, though, from Drake, is a guy that we really believe in, that probably not known by many, but interestingly enough, he transfers from Drake into the Big 12, just like Darren DeVries. And, so that'll be a lot of fun. Elijah Hawkins from Minnesota is somebody that people are very high on. I'm excited for him to be at Lubbock. And Federico coming from Capel, Coach Capel at Pittsburgh, is just a big, long, rangy dude who can block some shots and just, mucks it up inside and has a good time doing so. So I'm really intrigued by what Coach McCaslin has coming in there at Texas Tech.
Yeah, you mentioned the Norchad Omier 2-man game and how that's going to probably work really well for Scott Drew and the Bears. I think the potential for an Elijah Hawkins, JT Toppin, similar situation. Hawkins averaged over 7 assists last year at Minnesota. I know the Golden Gophers weren't very good, but anybody who can average 7 assists in the Big Ten is probably going to translate quite well. And I like the fit in McCaslin's system for him. And we've kind of talked about Toppin a handful of times. An energy big, really good rebounder, rim runner. I think him and Hawkins in a 2-man game is going to be really, really good for McCaslin and the Red Raiders. We closed it out, and we had a hard time picking this final spot because there are quite a few teams that absolutely could be in this conversation. We could have talked about West Virginia. We could have talked about Arizona. We could have even talked about Oklahoma State, but we're talking about TCU. We're talking about Jamie Dixon's squad, the Horned Frogs in Fort Worth. I really like this class. And some of the other outlets, we use like 24/7's transfer rankings, and we looked at Evan Miyakawa's rankings, and they're not as high on TCU as I think you and I are. And I think a big part of that is maybe some uncertainty about how Trezarian White is going to translate, coming from UNC Wilmington, transferring to TCU. I really like Traz White. He's a really good scorer. He was decently efficient last year, not elite as an efficiency guy, but somebody who was very productive. UNC Wilmington is a good program in a decent basketball conference. So I'm excited to see what he brings. It's not just him, though. Frankie Collins was really good last year at Arizona State. He's now, transferring to the conference that Arizona State is also joining, of course, in the Big 12. But I think Frankie Collins is great. Noah Reynolds is kind of a sneaky good addition coming over from Green Bay. So, it's close with Arizona, with West Virginia, with some of the other teams here that we didn't mention. But I think Traz White and the other guys coming into this TCU class are enough that I have them as a top 5 class preseason heading into the Big 12 season here.
Yeah, Andy, again, preseason being the optimal word here, because once we get into this thing and we start mixing it all together and see what we actually got, it's undoubtedly that we're going to be dead wrong on some of these picks. And we can't wait to see what those will be.
Well, I think I want to talk about some superlatives. We're going to talk some dark horse transfers. Who are some guys who might thrive in the Big 12 that we haven't mentioned, that we haven't talked about, that maybe aren't getting a lot of love? Who's the best fit at their new school? All that and more coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about today's sponsor, Ibata. Are you taking that dream vacation this summer but dreading the cost? With Ibata, you get cash back on all of your purchases, so you can spend more time making memories and less time dreaming about them. With Ibata, earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys, so you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibata user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've been eyeing, or a fancy dinner you've been craving. It's time you join the over 50 million users who choose Ibata to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibata by using the code LOCKEDONCollege when you register. Just go to the Apple App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibata app to start earning cash back. And make sure to use code LOCKEDONCollege for $5. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play Store or Apple App Store using code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, Isaac, let's close out our transfer portal episode here, talking about the Big 12 conference with some superlatives. Like you said on the ACC show, it's like a yearbook. We're talking about some of the different types of winners we could see out of the Big 12. We're going to talk about the most likely to get drafted, a sophomore that might break out, some dark horse candidates, the best team fit, and the best up transfer, player transferring from a mid-major school up to the high major here at the Big 12. Let's start with the most likely draft pick. And Isaac, it's probably the player we've talked about the singular most amount of times on this show so far. Who do we got?
JT Toppin. This man's coming over from New Mexico. Absolute dude. And what's neat is he's only a sophomore, Andy. Mm-hmm. And so, I know not everyone watched the Mountain West Conference last year. 12.4 points a game, 9.1 rebounds. He doesn't shoot many threes, but he made 34% of them last year. He needs to get better at the free throw line. But even though, he's a little bit of an undersized big for like a 5, had 1.9 blocks a game. So clearly the timing's there, and over a steal a game as well. And so Andy's just a really interesting mix of skills that JT brings to the table. And we often talk about how big that freshman to sophomore leap is. I cannot wait to see what he does being in the Big 12 conference. Like just thinking about him and Norchad Omier going up against each other. Like I cannot wait for that.
Yeah. And Toppin's a guy who was on draft radars before he pulled out of the NBA draft to end up transferring or hitting the portal and then end up going to Texas Tech. But he was a guy who was already getting draft buzz coming off a freshman season at New Mexico. So the upside here is definitely very high. And the next category is sophomore breakout. Obviously, we could include JT Toppin here, but we're going to try to talk about different players in different categories. And I was going to say, well, we're trying to talk about different teams. But in this case, we're actually going to talk about the same team. We're going to continue to talk Texas Tech. Kevin Overton coming from Drake to Texas Tech. I know we mentioned him earlier. He was a freshman last year for Darian DeVries at Drake. DeVries heads to West Virginia. Overton heads to Texas Tech, guy who averaged 11 points, 3.5 boards last year. He's a really nice three-point shooter, 35%, so not elite, but that was on 5.1 attempts per game. I think in a system where he's not going to be as heavily defended as he was at Drake, I think you're going to see that three-point percentage tick up for him at Texas Tech. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Overton is a guy who averages in double figures and shoots 40-ish% from three. And frankly, there's a lot of great transfers joining the Big 12, but there weren't a lot of sophomores who guys who were freshmen last year who are joining for their sophomore year. Toppin and Overton were kind of the two most notable ones. So talked about Overton here. The honorable mentions would be Arrington Page going from USC to Cincinnati. I think he could have a nice role for Wes Miller's team, or Miro Little transferring from Baylor to Utah. I think Utah is going to potentially give Little a pretty big opportunity to play a big role for that team, and that could lead to him having a nice sophomore season.
And one other thing I want to say about Overton really quick is I like his positional size. He's 6'5", I think does a lot of stuff there. Our next category, dark horse candidates. And this guy is the reason that many had West Virginia in their top 5 Big 12 classes, because it's not just Tucker DeVries. Yes, there are multiple guys at West Virginia, but another guy, and that's Javon Small, who's coming to West Virginia from Oklahoma State, where the reason we count him as a dark horse, even though he was playing in the Big 12, is things didn't go great in Stillwater last year, Andy, unfortunately. But Javon Small is a guy that just has a lot that he can bring to the table. I know that there are some divided opinions, I guess we'd say, on him. 2 years at ECU, then last year came to Stillwater to play there. And no problems transferring up. He averaged 15.8 points his sophomore year at ECU, 15.1 last year for the Cowboys, 37.4% from three on 5.3 attempts a game. 4.7 rebounds last year, even though he's 6'2", Andy. And I love to see a guy that size getting his nose in there, but also 4.1 assists a game. So the ability to score at that, we're talking about a guy in the Big 12 last year that was 15-4-4 on points, boards, and assists. And so I just think there's a lot he can do, especially now that he's going to be paired with DeVries. Those assists should go up, but, guarded less because of DeVries. So the scoring, I think, should be able to stay at least probably commensurate with where it was.
Yeah, I like Javon Small a lot. I like the fit for this transfer here. I think he is kind of a sneaky player who's not getting talked about all that much, but who I think is going to thrive in a new system with his new teammates at West Virginia. And the honorable mention there could have gone a whole bunch of different ways here. I'm not sure how under the radar Doug McDaniel is necessarily, but again, we talked. Tyler Perry was a transfer from North Texas to Kansas State, who had a lot of success. Marquise Noel, of course, before that transferred to Jerome Tang's system, and now they get a point guard coming in who was so successful at Michigan despite the chaos that happened for Juwan Howard's program last year. McDaniel's a great scorer. He's a great facilitator. I love what he brings to Kansas State. I think he could be one of the best guards in a really, really good conference next year. And while I think he's getting some buzz, I'm not sure that he's getting as much buzz for how good he might end up being next year for the Wildcats. Want to talk?
Go ahead. Sorry. I want to set you up because I know you're passionate about this next one.
Yeah.
We're talking best fit, the player that comes somewhere where it just works. Andy, this is somebody you've been high on since while they were at their old school, and you've been excited about it all offseason, a player that unfortunately suffered an injury last year.
Yeah.
Take us there.
Yeah, it's Joshua Jefferson transferring from St. Mary's, transferring to Iowa State. The fit here, it just feels like a glove. Like it's really, really perfect.
Like an O.J. Simpson, you must kind of glove?
like how a normal glove would fit a normal person.
Okay.
Joshua Jefferson was a sophomore last year at St. Mary's. He didn't play much as a freshman, kind of blossomed his sophomore year under Randy Bennett, 10-5, which at St. Mary's in their very, very slow-paced offense, you average double figures. That's very, very good. That's kind of the equivalent of averaging like 15 or more at other programs that don't play quite the same pace that they do. But Jefferson he's 6'8". He's a big bodied guy. He can kind of play the 4. He could maybe be a small ball 5. He can even play a little bit of the 3. He's got enough positional versatility to play multiple roles. And now he goes to a team that is defensive focused under TJ Otzelberger, the Cyclones. He's got enough offensive versatility to still be able to contribute. I love this fit because Iowa State really didn't lose very much from last year's roster. So any players they brought in was kind of just cake. It was just like extra for what they did last year. And now they get this 6'8", switchable, versatile defender who comes from a system where they prioritize defense and physicality and rebounding, who kind of showed a lot of growth as an offensive player from his freshman year to his sophomore year, and now goes to a system where I think he'll have a little bit more offensive freedom than he did for the Gales. I love this fit. I'm very excited about it. I think Joshua Jefferson is a very strong, like full-on breakout candidate, depending on what that role looks like for the Cyclones. I wouldn't be surprised to see him making a lot of headlines this year.
Yes, love that icing on that cake that you're talking about there, Andy. Our honorable mention, Milos Uzan, who goes from Oklahoma to Houston. We just think he's going to be a great guard in the Kelvin Sampson system. That's a hard phrase to say. Kelvin Sampson system. 6'4" guy, like lots of good size. You know, we just keep thinking, who is the next Jamal Shed? Who is the, all that. And so he should be a dude. Andy, our last category here, who is the best up transfer? And there's multiple names we've already talked about. The guy we are choosing here is Trey Townsend, who comes from Oakland to Arizona. Now, when you think Oakland, you probably think of Jack Golke because you never saw Oakland play until they beat Kentucky, and Jack Golke went absolutely off. Jack Golke was a bench player for that team. Andy, Trey Townsend is the guy who was the Horizon Player of the Year. He's going to Arizona, where he's going to join Tommy Lloyd's team and their high-level offense. This dude's going to score a ton of points. It's going to be a blast to watch him play. Can't wait to watch that. So, there's obviously we could talk JT Toppin again here because he's an up transfer. We just can't. We're saying we're not going to use the same names over and over and over again. So Trey Townsend's the pick. Multiple other good choices here, like Achor coming from Samford. Andy, it's funny. I told you this before we got started. We had a show where when Coleman Hawkins committed to Kansas State, we speculated about, is this too much in the front court? And people came at me as a Carolina guy saying, you're just sour grapes on Coleman Hawkins. No, it's because I want Achor to go off. And I'm nervous that Coleman Hawkins cutting into his minutes. And then Trezarian White and Zeke Mayo, who somehow we've not yet talked about on this show, who goes from South Dakota State to Kansas. No, we did talk about him.
We mentioned him briefly, yeah.
Yeah, I apologize for that. We haven't talked about him enough because he's speaking of Torrent scoring a ton of points. He's going to do that for Bill Self in Kansas.
Yeah, a lot of great up transfer options here for this conference. Trey Townsend, I think, is the right pick here. Arizona's got needs In the front court, Umar Ballo hit the transfer portal. Kashad Johnson and Pelle Larson have moved on to the NBA, teaming up with the Miami Heat. This team needs somebody to fill in that 3-4 hybrid role. Townsend can do it. They get Anthony Del Orso from Campbell. I think he's a really nice transfer addition as well, that I wanted to toss his name in here as two mid-major guys joining that team. But yeah, I think there's a lot of really good players coming from the mid-major ranks who are going to play really good basketball in the Big 12 next year.
Oh, Andy, this was fun. ACC yesterday, Big 12 today, folks. We got a whole week plus one coming up of these transfer shows. Tomorrow we move to the Big East. Thursday's Big 10. Friday will be SEC. And next Monday, best of the rest, 26 other conferences out there to choose from. We'll certainly narrow that down beautifully, Andy. I have no concerns about that. If you're not subscribed to the show on audio and video, please do that so you make sure you don't miss a second. If you're not part of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community, we'd love to have you join us there as well. The link is in the show notes. It's free to join. Yeah, absolutely free. That's something we want to offer to you. It's always a great day to get to talk about college basketball. We want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. We talked about a couple of them today, and until tomorrow, peace.